The Biometric Information Privacy Act. It's a measure that passed back in, 2008, 2009? And it essentially says that a company can be held liable if it captures your biometric information, like your face print or your fingerprint, and stores it without your consent. And we've seen this in various instances where lawsuits were brought against, say, Facebook and Google and TikTok and Snapchat and all of these tech companies that use your face print to do a variety of things. Like saying, hey, you tagged, your friends are in this photo, we're automatically tagging them for you. Well, Facebook settled, and I think people across the state of Illinois got somewhere around $400 some odd from Facebook for them settling that, and there's even settlements with Google and Snapchat and so on. So the Biometric Information Privacy Act even led to lawsuits against White Castles, which, burger chain, they had their employees scan their fingerprint to log in, and it was challenged in the courts and went to the Illinois Supreme Court, which ultimately upheld that White Castle could face billions in dollars in liabilities, because it's essentially how they interpreted it is that it's each instance of the print being scanned without that individual's consent. So the business groups from the Illinois Chamber of Commerce to the Illinois Manufacturers Association to technology groups and associations and even healthcare groups and associations, they've been pushing for some changes to BIPA, the Biometric Information Privacy Act, with little movement. And there was a measure that was proposed last week that the business community came out and said that they don't like and actually makes it worse. So there are other considerations, though, especially for those in the fingerprint industry and licensed fingerprint vendors. If you work for, say, a regulated industry in gambling or in cannabis, or if you as an individual want to get quicker access to a FOID card or to a concealed carry license, you can have the option of providing those fingerprints. So fingerprint technology obviously is also in consideration here when talking about the Biometric Information Privacy Act. One of the good things about being in the capacity I'm in, you get people reaching out with all kinds of inputs and different perspectives. And one individual reached out to me, Brett Dahlmeyer. He is a licensed fingerprint vendor working for a small business, and he brought forward some of his concerns about the Biometric Information Privacy Act and how there needs to be changes, not necessarily to BIPA, but for the fingerprint vending groups. There needs to be some changes. So as an individual, he shared some of his thoughts with me yesterday, and overarching concerns about how fingerprint vendors are impacted by BIPA.
Really, I think what we should start with is that BIPA is about doing the right thing. It's about providing an individual with the appropriate written notifications that their biometrics are being collected, that they will be retained for a specific period of time and then destroyed in accordance with a retention schedule. So I think that the industry believes in that they steward that very well, and it certainly is the right thing to do. But the fact of the matter is that the way that the law is written is that there's a loophole that's in place. The loophole allows the private right of action to be brought against private entities in possession of biometrics. So there is an exemption in the BIPA Act, that nothing can conflict with the Locksmith Act, the Private Detective, Private Alarm Contractor, Private Security Guard, Fingerprint Vendor Act of 2004, a law that actually predates BIPA, and it seemed as though that the legislature intended to exempt those entities from BIPA. However, the way that the two laws are written, it's kind of a circular, endless loophole where private individuals can bring lawsuits against these critical professions. These professions that ensure public safety, the welfare of Illinois citizens, and really essential services, including working with students, working with hospital patients or in a nursing home to become security guards, private investigators to operate casinos, cannabis dispensaries or liquor establishments. This entire industry is vertically integrated, in the state and serves urban and rural communities alike.
So I'm sharing a bit of a conversation I had with Brett Dahlmeyer yesterday about BIPA and its impact on the fingerprint vending industry and on individuals who are licensed fingerprint operators. And he goes into more detail about how they specifically, not just the industry of fingerprint vending, but also the individuals who are licensed to do this, how they're impacted if he says a loophole is not closed within the BIPA law.
Yeah.
Here is Dahlmeyer talking more about this.
Yeah, really. Most fingerprint vendor agencies are small businesses. There are about 100 licensed fingerprint vendor agencies in the state that process over 525,000 fingerprints annually. But think of a very small fingerprint vendor processing just 2,000 annual fingerprints with a 5-year statute of limitation liability violation. That's astronomical. A small business doing that many fingerprints has the liability of between $10 million and $50 million just based on the BIPA right of action. And, there's no adverse action to be taken against the person filing the suit. Even if the suits are dismissed, nothing prevents other suits from being filed. And every fingerprint taken is just another potential lawsuit. We know that there are at least 2 lawsuits that have been filed without merit in just the past several months alone. And it really could just go on and on and on. So, this has severe implications for agencies such as the Illinois State Police, the IDFPR, IDPH, Secretary of State, DCFS. You mentioned the Firearm Services Bureau over at ISP. Just to be clear, fingerprints are optional for both the FOID Act and the Concealed Carry Act. However, if individuals do choose to provide their fingerprints, it really does provide a field of benefits, for those individuals providing their fingerprints. But there's employers being named in these lawsuits, and nothing in the BIPA Act or the Fingerprint Vendor Locksmith Act in its current form will prevent or reduce these lawsuits from occurring without legislative action.
So we haven't seen legislative action about BIPA changes or even the changes that Dahlmeyer here is suggesting. We'll hear more about what he's proposing to have done to close those loopholes he says could impact the fingerprint vending industry through BIPA if nothing's done. So stay tuned. We'll get to that coming up here with Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and... We're hearing some comments from a licensed fingerprint scanning operator who works for a vendor that has concerns about the Biometric Information Privacy Act and changes he says should be done to different parts of the law to close loopholes he says could snag up licensed fingerprint operators with expensive lawsuits. But you have others in the business community, the Manufacturers Association, the healthcare sector, and the technology sector that have for months now been saying there needs to be substantial changes to shore up BIPA to make sure it doesn't lead to what could possibly be billions of dollars of findings and litigation brought against these companies. And a lot of litigation's already happened. But Brett Dahlmeyer, he's a licensed fingerprint collector, works for a vendor here in Illinois. He talked about the concerns from the business community, from the tech community, and also from the healthcare sector. And he says that there are already some protections in those spaces for those industries. And again, here's Brett Dahlmeyer sharing some of his thoughts with me from yesterday.
Well, personally, I didn't really see a need to change BIPA in its current form. There's already an exemption that's baked into the lock that nothing to the act that says nothing can conflict with the Fingerprint Vendor Locksmith Act. And if you look at some of the concerns in the industry, the locksmiths, the private alarm contractors, fingerprint vendors, those are the folks who are servicing, the time-based safes, right? The time-based fingerprint lock safes at the various cannabis or pharmaceutical industries. If you look at, the fingerprint vendors who are doing background checks with ISP, the security purposes that we've seen various amendments for. So really, why, BIPA is not complicated law, and maybe it really doesn't need to be changed. What if we just amended the Fingerprint Vendor and Locksmith Act of 2004 to ensure that the enforcement is really only by IDFPR, that IDFPR is the only entity, and no private cause of action is allowed against a licensee or employee, and any existing private causes of actions were unlawful. If we don't want to change BIPA, and because it's good simple law, and it takes care of the threat against consumers, who are being threatened by larger organizations they're national, right? But here in Illinois, if an entity is licensed by the IDFPR and we just change those administrative rules, or make a small amendment to the act, then the enforcement provisions of BIPA would conflict, and therefore it wouldn't even apply to those entities any longer. I think that's what the legislature intended. If you go back and read the transcripts from the 2008 legislature, you could tell that that there were a few amendments, but they wanted to exempt fingerprint vendors and these entities from the enforcement actions under BIPA, not recklessly, right? If these agencies were reckless or malicious, certainly the penalties should be severe. But what we have here is all these businesses are operating and not only operating, but really are the premier subject matter experts on BIPA and implementing those controls that are described in the act. So if those regulations and controls are in place, already, there really shouldn't be a lot of private cause of action. And so if we just leave BIPA alone and amend the Locksmith Act or amend its JCAR rules, the Joint Committee of Administrative Rules, it seems like that would be a simpler route to assuage many of the industry's concerns.
And again, hearing Brett Dahlmeyer, he's a licensed fingerprint collector with a vendor here in Illinois. Some final thoughts he has about possible changes to BIPA.
Yeah. I mean, there's already exemptions for biometrics that are possessed in a healthcare setting. Those lawsuits have been seen, easily dismissed for companies they're quite far, not really associated with that. So really, the private detective, the private alarm, the private security, the fingerprint vendor, the Locksmith Act, a lot of these companies are at risk under that. So the healthcare folks, they have their own exemption in BIPA, and if that needs to change, that's sort of up to them. But we've seen, I think you can quick search, you can see a lot of BIPA lawsuits have been dismissed due to biometrics that are captured in a healthcare setting. I mean, banks are completely exempted. I don't think anybody's asking for a complete exemption. Nobody's asking for, at least from my perspective, for BIPA to be watered down. I just think we need to give the Locksmith Act, industry, if you will, give the exemption some teeth, right? And you don't even need to modify BIPA to do that. You can just modify the Locksmith Act or its rules.
Have you talked?
I think that would cover a lot of industry players, if you will.
Have you talked to any legislators about your concerns yet?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We have written letters. We've had phone calls just to try to, but I think it's kind of a narrow, sort of a narrow concern, but it does require some explanation. I've talked with others about this, and it takes a little bit of explaining. But the fact is that there's nothing illegal about an attorney bringing a private class of action against a fingerprint vendor, because nothing conflicts with the law as it's currently written. So it's really like this circular, sort of, loophole. And on one hand, the BIPA Act has an exemption for fingerprint vendors and locksmiths. But then if you go to the rules for the fingerprint vendors, or it points back to BIPA. So really, there's no conflict, and that means that the lawsuits are allowed to proceed. And so we certainly have reached out to our legislators, and certainly I think they do hear, but I think there's a lot of concern that that the industry, that the business community in Illinois just wants to water down BIPA. I don't think that's the case here. I think that's entirely the opposite of what we do and what we believe. We really believe in that informed written consent and making sure that the person receives the proper notifications prior to having their biometrics captured, and certainly most importantly destroying those biometrics within the time promised. And I think the industry does that, and it's just an unintended sort of oversight or loophole. The legislature did not intend. I don't even think the Illinois ACLU would have intended the entire fingerprint vendor industry, to go bust in this state. I don't think that was the intent. I think this is all about doing the right thing, and we just need to make sure that we're not, running the fingerprint vendor industry out of business in this state while we figure that out.
Again, thanks to Brett Dahlmeyer for reaching out and giving us a bit of that insight on how licensed fingerprint operators and vendors are possibly going to be impacted by the Biometric Information Privacy Act, and what changes that he as an individual would like to see when it comes to state law impacting this space. So will lawmakers address this before the end of session? Who knows? Are they going to advance another BIPA change that the business community doesn't like? I guess that we should